With the imminent launch of our game Fly Together, we sat down to discuss some of our favorite parts from the development. So we are launching Fly Together this week. Feels kind of unreal to say that.
Very unreal.
Yeah, and Kasper, you've been the lead developer on this game for how long have you been working on this?
Since the start of 2019, which is 2 years ago now.
How are you feeling right now?
I think you said it best. It feels super unreal. Like both the having worked on it for 2 years, because time just flies by, but also I'm just really excited to see people play it now.
Me too. Like, take me back to let's talk about that beginning, right? Because it was kind of like a weird start to this project. In your own words, like, can you take us back to the early starts of Fly Together?
Well, to tell the story properly, we need to go one step further back before that, and that's we did Conduct Together. We launched it it was Christmas 18. And it was doing generally pretty well. People were picking it up and playing it. Generally positive impressions. We were like feeling empowered. Oh, people played it and people think it's like a really good idea with like taking an old game and like shaking it up with a new co-op formula. And we were like feeling empowered to do like, all right, let's try this again, but let's up the difficulty a bit. Let's take a game that totally won't work on a console and then see what we can do. And Michael, dear boss, said, all right, Cass, you're going to be working on porting Fly This now to the Switch and making it fun for multiple people. And I go, I have no idea how to do that. And Michael goes, well, I have no idea how to do that. So we're just, all right, let's just sit down and try to figure out how to do this.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes it's a blessing and a curse coming from an existing game and then trying to make it fit into a new formula, right? Because the blessing is that we have a lot of tools at hand, right? We had a very good game on mobile, and then trying to reinvent that somehow posed like a lot of weird restrictions. And I feel with the conversion from Conduct This to Conduct Together, that gap, while still a gap, and we spent about a year on that game porting it and figuring out it had to be a co-op experience and retooling that whole thing. That was less of a gap than the huge chasm we've sort of leaped over with Fly This and Fly Together, right? And I know that some people will probably look at this and be like, oh, it's just a port, right? But it's so much more.
So much more.
It's a completely different game. I think the beginning of it was really interesting because for the longest time with this game, we weren't even really sure whether or not we could do it, right? There weren't any of that sort of ambiguity with Conduct Together. With Fly Together, it sort of remained to be seen whether or not we could make the Switch do motion control in a satisfying way, right? Can you talk about that? Like, talk about Spain, talk about, like, take us back to that, like the university level science of it all.
Yeah, I have a master's degree in game technology and design, but I'm not very good at math. And that kind of, like, I'm not good at the engineering part of math and stuff like that. And that kind of comes to express itself when I'm sitting there with the Joy-Con, with the Nintendo Switch Joy-Con, and I'm like, all right, how do I make the thing when I tilt up it? I want to make the
make the hand go up.
Yeah, I want hand go up. Yeah. So I had to call in a few favors from some friends to sit me down and teach me like proper like the calculations I actually need to do to like do all the math necessary. And there was a lot of tuning, and we basically, the entire North Play Copenhagen division, if I can call it that, we took like a workcation to Malaga in Spain to visit one of our colleagues, Ulrich. And we rented out an Airbnb with a big pool, and we sat in the pool house, and we spent a week just jamming on different projects. And I was sitting there just going 1 week, just coding hard and like trying to make the pointer controls not be terrible. And at the end of, and we built like, I remember we did like elaborate constructions. We were like stacking bar stools on top of each other, so we like could like move the Joy-Cons up and down. Like strictly linearly without it like having the shake of a normal hand. And like we would build all of this and then we would move the Joy-Con and it would still like shake all over the screen and be terrible. Yeah.
Hey everybody. So We're in Malaga, Spain, with the North Plate team, and we just have a few days of working together. Say hi to the guys.
Hello.
What's up?
Welcome to El Casa del Game Dev.
I love it. We actually also came here to work on another secret project, but we can't really show that.
It's going well.
How is the? Well, yeah. Let's Ulrich. How is the secret project going?
Better than expected.
Let's ask the skeptic.
There's still a long way to go.
For people watching this, maybe because people might have questions. Like, the reason why this is difficult is because this is unsupported on the Switch. The Switch is not a Wii, right? There is no sensor bar or whatever. There's an accelerometer inside the Joy-Con, and you can use the different, like, there's a gyroscope as well. Like, we can use the different outputs of those things to try to calculate and pretend to do motion control, Wii-style motion control, right? And I think that there's a few games that have tried that, but not a lot of games have sort of made it their main control, like the main scheme of control. So during this whole process, and specifically in Malaga, this question hung over everyone's head, like, will this ever be good enough for us to ship a game with it?
And I remember Michael's face trying. I feel like, hey, I made it a bit better. Try it out now. And I hand the Joy-Con to him, and he sits and points with it a bit, and he goes, I don't like this. I don't think this will ever work.
Yeah, no, it was tough. Like I was a healthy skeptic, but I feel like it's also because I know that motion control has a lot of stigma attached to it, right?
It truly does.
Yeah. And there's a lot of gamers that would run screaming away from that, and so to attempt that on a console that actually doesn't natively support it, it has to be better than just serviceable, right? And we built all these elaborate. You talked about this yourself, like these tools and things, like different tiny pieces of software. Like I remember, like the different lines you had to trace, like the spiral,
like
and you have to like follow,
kind of
and we could get, because the thing is, if you're trying to test something like this out, right, you might have a healthy skeptic in me and be like, oh, it doesn't feel good, right? But then someone else tries and like, oh, it feels great, right? So we needed some sort of way to score these things. So we kind of had like a tiny little scoring system, right, where you'd be like, how well did you do, so that we could just ask the computer if it was good enough, right?
Yeah, instead of relying on personal feedback, right? And what we found out, actually, a big part of doing motion controls is that there's no like tactile button you're pushing down, and because like you don't get the immediate feedback that you did something correctly by pushing the button all the way down or not. So there's a lot of room for interpretation from the player side. And what we found out very quickly was that if a player decided, before they even pick up the controls, if they decided, I'm not gonna like this, they're never gonna like it. And if they decided, no, I want to give it a chance, they're gonna like it in advance. So not only are we tasked with the responsibility of building actual, reliable, great, fun, feels good to control motion controls, but we also have to like overcome the impression that people have of like, all motion controls are bad.
Yeah.
And I think the best litmus test of it is, the controls, because we've been refining it for years now, I feel like it's gotten to a point where I personally prefer to play with it.
Yeah. That's like the greatest compliment you can get.
Yeah, I like it. I built it and I like it.
Yeah. Hey, and for the record, I also love it. That's my preferred way of playing now. Healthy skeptic aside, but I think that that was such an interesting part of the story, is this sort of ambiguity about motion control and how we address that, because it was more than any other game that we've done. I think there's other things that you can talk about with Fly Together that's very ambitious, but more than any other game we've done, this has been like a technological challenge, a communication challenge. We built a lot of scaffolding around controls because we knew that some people would just prefer to play with stick. So we wanted to support that, right? And so we had to build a lot of scaffolding around the controls. And I think I just saw an early review, we talked about this the other day, of someone saying like that the menu system for choosing controls was like the most smooth thing he'd ever seen, right? And that just makes us incredibly happy, because we spent that for that one first year constantly banging ourselves over the head, being like, it's got to be more smooth. You got to be easily able to check in and check out things, change control types. You got to understand why motion control is good. All those things. It's a weird thing to talk about, right? But the control is really it's the way you interact with the game. It's how the game can be the best game ever, but if you have shitty controls, you're never gonna stay a while and listen, right?
Yeah.
That's
one way to put it.
Yeah. Another thing we figured out was we had a scenario where one group of people would really love the controls. They're great, and it worked, and they could totally figure it out. And another group of people, they just hated it, not just because of preconceptions, but they couldn't. We saw them test it, and they couldn't make it work. It just didn't really work for them. And we were like, what's going on here, right? And then we figured out that the way that you hold the controllers is a switch, right? The way that you hold people apparently do motion controls in different ways, right? And one way is that people move their wrists, which works great for Fly Together. That's how you should do it. You rest your arms somewhere and just move your wrists. It's the most casual thing ever. And then some people, they do this. They move. You've seen relatives play the Wii like this, I'm sure.
Yes.
Everyone's seen that, right? And so how do you bridge something like that? You have this control scheme. It's our job to communicate that, to design a good experience around it. It's your job to develop controls that somehow encompasses both this and this.
Okay, so this is the designer in me speaking here, all right? I never thought that the way I would best solve a problem, because we tried a few different things, and it turns out the thing that we tried that worked the best was just to tell the player up front, just put in a picture and some text and says, yo, by the way, this game will work better if you use your wrist a bit more. And it just, the numbers just flip completely if we just tell the players a bit in advance. And it's a very, not very elegant game design things. Ideally, you'd like to see all of these things be taught to the player without them noticing. But this was such a big... Because this is how do you control the game? And the rest of the game follows after that. So if you don't get this one part right, everything else after that is going to suffer. So now we're just going to put in a funny picture and some text, and we got people's attention, and it works. And there was one other problem that we experienced that was completely... It felt like pure chance that some players would just sit down and go, I don't like these controls. And they know how to do the wrist thing, they know how to point properly, and they just... I don't feel like it's very responsive, and I don't like it. And I sit there, designer and engineer, and I go, I don't understand. And I watch another set of test players go through, I don't understand what's going on. And then, trying many different things, we discovered it's actually because they're sitting too far away from the console. Yeah. Or they're blocking the controller with their body or something, and the signal is interrupted. So what they're experiencing is the connection to the Switch console from the controller is being interrupted, and their cursor would jolt around. And we discovered, strangely enough, that if you put in a tiny hey, the connection is bad. Yeah. You should move closer to the console. If you put in a tiny icon, suddenly people weren't blaming the game at all anymore. And they go, oh, it feels unresponsive. There's a tiny low connection indicator. I'm gonna move closer. And it's funny how such a small problem the connection is a bit wobbly because you're sitting too far away has such a huge impact on whether they enjoy the game or not. Yeah. So it's weird to say, but I feel spending 2 years just polishing the small details around just one control style actually is so important for being able to enjoy the game properly at the end. Yeah. And I feel we've gotten to a point, as I've mentioned earlier, that we're ready. This is ready to be put into hands of players. It doesn't get much better than this on this console. It doesn't get much better than this. It's actually very enjoyable. Spend 5 minutes playing with it, and you will never want to play without it again. Yeah. I will take that bet.
I think there's really what we're talking about here is that there's two sets of things that we've done to make it work. There is the science part of it, which has definitely been refined. We did little things where it felt almost it was too jittery, and then you smoothed out you did some math, you smoothed out the curves. It just feels more stable. We also did like actual interactable things, like if your hand actually moves too far to like one side, and we sort of try to detect that. And if it's like hanging out the side of the screen, we have like a little tiny little like actionable thing where you like press to recenter.
Yeah,
you can always
remind you to. Yeah.
You can always recenter the cursors, and you'll be doing that a lot when you play with this sort of stuff. We have like a whole onboarding situation where you have to actually put down the controller on the desk and have it like have all the internals.
You let the gyroscope rest.
Yeah, you let the gyro rest. And then you have to pick it up and you have to point the screen. And there's like this whole thing. So I feel like there's like two areas where we improved. One is the math and the science of it all, and trying to do the best we could. And then the bigger area has actually been like communicating, polishing all the details, little things like helping people out who might have like bad connection, or trying to communicate as much as possible up front, or the scaffolding as we call it around the controls. Yeah. I think that's the control. We could talk for hours about the controls.
We could.
Yeah, I think and the thing is, if it works, no one will care.
No one notices all the hard work that went into it. Yeah.
And this is also one of now we're talking about it. This is probably the game that we've tested the most that we've ever developed, right? We've had continuous like game tests for like a year now. So many different people come into the office during pandemic with testing and keeping people.
We're super thankful for people taking the time out.
It's been amazing to have that help, right? And it's been a lot of work to digest all of that. And we've just been having like weekly meetings really about the findings and trying to improve it and see if people didn't really understand. And I think up until like sometime last year, I still had doubts about the motion control. It was like, I feel like that's been like the biggest, and maybe I scoured the early reviews we've gotten looking for any dangerous things about like, oh, I didn't like the controls, right? Because I feel like there's this uncanny valley with controls like this where as you said, 5-10 minutes, right? The first 5 or 10 minutes, it's gonna feel kind of different.
You're not used to it. You're not
used to it. It's kind of weird. And there's some recentering, and you just got to figure out your stride. And then most people in all of our tests, after they've played 10, 15 minutes maybe, they never mention it again. Like
they just stop thinking about it. They just play without thinking.
So my fear is that if people don't give it that 10, 15 minutes, right, of like, just try it. We've spent so long working on it. And it's going to be really good.
It's going to be
Anyways. Yeah. And I mean, next time I suggest that we make a game that has like 3 or 4 different ways of controlling it, please stop me, right? It's like you can play it with touch. You can play it with.
You can chew the controller.
You can chew the controller. You can play it with stick like this. You can play with a Pro controller as well. You can play like handheld, right? You can. There's so many ways of controlling this game.